Good evening, everybody. My name is Ware Harmon. I'm the Executive Director of Town Hall Seattle. On behalf of our staff and our friends at Third Place Books, it's a pleasure to welcome you to tonight's presentation with Levi Vonk and Courtney Hudak. As we get underway, I want to acknowledge that our institution stands on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, and particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continuing use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. And we are very glad you're here to join us tonight. Presentation will run around 60 minutes, including Q&A. And to submit your questions for the Q&A portion of the event, please enter meet.ps/Vonk, that's V-O-N-K, or scan the QR code right now on screen with your smartphone. And we'll drop that link into the chat as well, so you can submit your question at any time. In fact, pro tip, the sooner you send it, the smoother our transition to Q&A will be at the appointed time. We'll try to get to as many as possible. And also, if you'd like to view the program with closed captioning, click the CC button in the bottom right corner of your video player. Town Hall's adding new events and podcasts all the time, both virtual and especially live these days. Upcoming programs include Virginia delegate Danica Rome, describing her story as the first ever out, seated, and transgendered legislator in American history. Political philosopher Francis Fukuyama locks eyes with Eric Liu to discuss the current crisis of classical liberalism. Looking beyond those, you'll find appearances by Mimi Gates, David Duchovny, Ibram X. Kendi, Michael Pollan, that one's soon to be announced. Crosscut Festival featuring Nicole Hannah-Jones, at least for the Town Hall portion. And on June 5th, the final installment of Short Stories Live for this season, a program called Extraordinary, Discovering the Other, that's curated and directed by Jane Kaplan. Visit our website to join our email list and get the latest updates on programs. Town Hall's Civics series is supported by the Real Networks Foundation and the True Brown Foundation. But as you likely know, if you've attended anything in the past and heard me go on about it, Town Hall is underneath it all a member-supported organization. And I want to thank all of our members for joining us. Finally, almost finally, that is, there's an actual introduction coming in a moment. But after tonight's talk, I feel certain you'll want to own your own copy of Levi's new book, Border Hackers. And so you can use the link in the chat below to pick up yours through our fantastic partners, as I mentioned, at Third Place Books. And with all that, a resident of both the US and Mexico, Levi Vonk is an author, photographer, and a PhD candidate in medical anthropology at UC Berkeley, where he's also a Chancellor's Fellow. His anthropological and photographic work has been funded by Fulbright Garcia Robles, Fulbright Hayes DDRA, and the Human Rights Center at UC Berkeley, among others. His writing tackles migration, violence, otherness, and borders, and his first book, Border Hacker, exemplifies an emerging subgenre of multi-narrator nonfiction. Courtney Hudak is a writer and attorney. Her legal work on representing asylum seekers on a pro bono basis with legal work representing asylum seekers on a pro bono basis as a volunteer for the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. Her writing has appeared in venues including the Sextant Review, Seattle Review of Books, the absolutely wonderful Ghosts of Seattle Past anthology, and the Substack newsletter Behind a Door, among others. She's the founder and host of the Social Justice Syllabus Book Club at Third Place Books. Please join me in welcoming Courtney Hudak and Levi Vonk.
Hi, Levi. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We are absolutely delighted to be your first stop for this excellent new book.
I'm excited to be here.
Great. Will you tell us a little bit about the book?
Sure. Yeah. So the book, again, it's called Border Hacker, and it's a nonfiction book that follows the journey of one undocumented Central American migrant and hacker named Axel Kirschner, who also happens to be one of my best friends. So the book follows his life and his journey after he was deported from the US. He was born in Guatemala, but he grew up in New York City, very New Yorker, and was involved in a minor traffic accident in New York while driving his son to kindergarten and was deported to Guatemala. I met Axel shortly after his deportation, by chance, completely by chance, on a migrant caravan in southern Mexico as he was trying to make his way back to his family and his home in New York. And we really just hit it off from there. At the time, I was there as a very young anthropologist. I'd been on the ground trying to work with migrants. In 2015 is when we met. And at the time when I was asked to join a migrant caravan, it was really interesting because I said, what's a migrant caravan? This is back before Trump, back before any of that. I hadn't heard of a migrant caravan. Almost no one had heard of a migrant caravan. And then suddenly I was kind of ushered into this strange but very interesting political formation, marching down the road, demanding migrant rights. And during that journey, Axel and I met and quickly became fast friends.
I have many questions about your journey and your relationship. But before we get to the questions, I actually would like to hear you read from a section of the book.
Sure. Yeah.
Give our audience an idea of the voices in the book.
Great. So this section comes from about the middle of the book. It's a part where Axel is actually stuck in southern Mexico, and he's asked me to come back and try to help him move through the country if possible. We're waiting for someone to come pick us up in a small town called Chahuites. And so we're sitting there on the side of the road waiting for this pickup. And this is where we begin. Chahuites was suffocating and silent. Every once in a while, a lone figure would shuffle by, a stray dog who looked us in the eyes, or a man carrying a machete who didn't. To pass the time, we conducted interviews. It was a habit that we were used to by then. When Axel didn't have a computer gig and there was nothing else to do in the shack, I'd pull out my notebook or recorder and we'd begin to talk. I'd ask Axel questions for hours and hours, and he would respond. The questions sometimes had no real point except to keep the conversations going. And his answers weren't always answers, but rather long, drawn-out stories about his past. Stories that had no real conclusion or climax, just events that blurred into other events or non-events until I asked a clarifying question, and then it would start all over again, a back and forth, like I was hunting for something, and he was either trying to find it for me or to keep me from finding it. But what exactly that thing was, neither of us seemed to be certain. All I knew was that something wasn't making sense. In Chahuites, the questions I'd previously pushed to the back of my mind kept forcing their way to the front. Watching Axel fix computers had been equal parts thrilling and unsettling. It made me rethink exactly what Axel had accomplished when he thwarted the police jammers and why he so impressed Father Solalinde. In the heat of the moment, I hadn't asked questions. I was just relieved that Axel found a solution, but how? How on earth did a man like Axel know how to outfox a federal police unit? And what else did he know? As my mind wandered, Axel began reminiscing about high school in New York. It was in high school, he said, that he found the one space where he could truly be himself, the robotics club. The club's supervising teacher recruited him to help build robots because he saw something in him, some potential, a gift, a thing that other teachers missed when they looked at Axel or heard him speak. What was his name? I asked. Ah, shit. It's been so long now, I don't even remember. You don't remember the name of the one teacher you actually liked? Nah, bro, I guess not. Suddenly there was an edge to Axel's voice, and I can guarantee that he don't remember me either. There's something about that irritated me. To be honest, dude, I said, I don't get it. Get what? You. These stories you're telling me. Look, I don't mean to be rude, but some of these things just aren't adding up. Like when you told me that you traveled to London in high school, I actually looked into that, and there's just no way that you could have traveled from the US to the UK and back on a Guatemalan passport alone. You'd need a visa. You saying I'm lying, bro? Hey, you were the one who said that after you were deported to Guatemala, they didn't recognize you as a citizen. So how would you have a passport as a teenager? Leave it alone, Levi. I was starting to get heated. Leave it alone? Dude, look around. I'm in the middle of the nowhere for you. Would anyone else do that? If you're so popular in high school, why aren't any of your friends helping you? Or your parents? Why am I the only one here? Axel was silent. I could tell that I'd hurt him. I'm sorry, man, I backtracked. I'm just scared. Back when you crossed the border and I didn't hear from you, I was freaking out. I thought that maybe I don't know, maybe you died. Fuck, bro. It's a terrible thing to say, but it's the truth. I was losing my mind, but you didn't die. And the day you called me from Guatemala City was one of the happiest days of my life because I care about you, man. I really care, but come on. I know something else is going on. I've seen what you can do with computers out here with no tools or resources or anything. You can't tell me that you just learned all this stuff for fun. Axel squinted into the sun. Look, Levi, I ain't sure how to say this, but I've had to do things in my life, things that I don't know if you'd understand. Well, you're right about that. I don't understand. I don't understand how back in Hermanos you managed to take down a police jammer single-handedly, and I don't understand Solalinde being all buddy-buddy with you afterward. What does he know about you? Axel started to speak, but I cut him off. Dude, I know I'm always pestering you with questions and asking you all this intrusive stuff about your life, but now you have to listen to what I have to say for once. You're right. I don't know what it's like to be deported or what it's like to run through Mexico, but I marched next to you. I've been sending you money that I don't have so you can travel, and I came all the way back to this hell on earth for you. So I want to know what the deal is. What happened back in Hermanos that day? Axel looked me in the eyes. All right, Levi. The truth is, bro, sometimes I'm forced to do things. What kinds of things? Things that is not exactly legit. He shifted in his seat. Illegal things. In that moment, it felt like the world narrowed and all I could see was Axel. The relentless heat, the endless dust, the insufferable town of Chahuites, all of it melted away, and the only thing I could feel was my heart pounding in my chest. Ah, screw it, he said, and a big smile cracked across his face. You caught me, motherfucker. I'm a hacker.
That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you. It touches on so many of the really fascinating aspects of your book. And I want to start with your literary method. That you've written a nonfiction book about immigration that reads like a mystery. What was your thinking? Why did you choose to do that?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. The very first thing, though, is like from the moment I met Axel, I knew that I was meeting a special person. Like the way he talked, the way he described things, I knew that I just had to shut up and be quiet and listen to what he was saying. And then eventually when we started, initially we did not mean to write a book together at all. It wasn't my plan. It wasn't Axel's plan. But when we first started to maybe have the idea of writing something together, I quickly realized I also couldn't quote him. Axel's voice would be totally wasted on me just quoting him alone in kind of like a normal, traditional, more academic or whatever kind of book. And I wanted instead to try to figure out a way to give him space to speak for himself and to let his voice shine. It's so vibrant. And so slowly over the course of several years, we began to think about what it might look like to have a book that instead of one narrator had two. So there are actually sections of the book that instead of me telling the story, they're in Axel's first person voice as well. And once we figured that out, and once we realized that we could have two narrators and these two narrators could have a discussion back and forth in the text itself, that really felt special because that's what we were doing every day. We were having talks back and forth with each other, and to kind of show the reader that as well, I think also then really points to our relationship and not just to a rote recitation of a migrant's journey or my expertise as an academic or anything like that. Instead, it's about two people struggling together against something that is much bigger and more violent than themselves, right? The US-Mexico border. And I think you get that when you see us talking back and forth in the text.
The relationship definitely rises or is connecting through the whole thing. My clients who have taken similar journeys talk about both the necessity and the impossibility of developing relationships that are trustworthy under these circumstances. Can you talk about why you trusted one another or how that grew over time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a trust that grew over time for sure. Actually, the beginning of the book, for anyone who reads it, you'll see that I opened the book very intentionally by saying, if you're traveling through Mexico, I really try to put the reader in the place of migrants, and to say the conundrum of traveling through Mexico is that you have to trust someone because you can't do it alone, but you can't trust anyone at the same time. And this is the tension, and this is kind of the impossible being of being a migrant. And I wanted to really capture that. So part of the book is Axel and I getting to know each other a little more, but then realizing that, at least on my part, that Axel might not be telling me the whole truth about himself, and me maybe even feeling hurt by that. And I thought we were friends, but so why aren't you telling me everything? And then slowly realizing over the course of that relationship that there is no, in order for Axel to protect himself, he can't always be truthful with everyone, including me and including the reader. And it was that moment when I had that realization that also our relationship changed, because in understanding that Axel can't always trust me, and maybe I can't always trust Axel, there's a kind of deeper trust in a weird way. You understand how this situation that's much bigger than either of you is creating this kind of relationship and this distance between you, but it's a distance that you can still try to charge into together and try to fight in a certain sense. And once I realized that, I think I also became a lot closer to Axel, and hopefully he became closer to me as well.
Before we go too much further, I know we wanted to talk about why Axel isn't with us.
Yeah. So the book was published 2 days ago. But shortly before that, about a week ago, we received a death threat. And we don't know who it's from. It was an anonymous death threat. But I hope I'm not being too graphic here, but the people who were threatening us said that because this book is coming out, they clearly don't want it to come out. And I can't say who it is, but I have my suspicions that it's maybe one of the people who we expose in this book as being whose praises are sung in Mexico and in the United States as a migrant activist. But actually, our book reveals that behind the scenes, things are much more seedy and more complicated. So we received this death threat that said that if they ever find Axel, they will kill him and hack his body to pieces, which is a common cartel tactic in Mexico, to not just murder someone, but then to mutilate them after they've died to scare others. And for that reason, Axel felt that he couldn't be here tonight. Being on screen or talking would just perhaps run the risk of his location being a little too identifiable. So, but he did, if now is a good time, he did give me a statement to read. It's very short. At first, when I asked Axel, I said, "Do you want to say anything?" He said, "No, I'm shy. I don't want to do it." But I'm really glad he did end up writing something. So, and the statement I should say is it's really addressed to American readers and people who live in the US in general. He says, "It's been hard, extremely hard and hardcore. And at some point it looked almost impossible. But the one thing you can be 100% sure of is that even when I was feeling down and my life felt impossible, I never truly lost hope on our little project. It's so crazy to know that my story is being read all over the world, because even though our book can travel, I can't. I'm a ghost. I hope Border Hacker can make others understand a little of what it feels like for me to be invisible and visible at the same time. Thank you to everyone who supported us since day one, including Francisco Goldman, John Lee Anderson, Tim McGowan, Martha Puskowski, Atlee Weber, and all the people at Bold Tide Books, our publisher."
I'm really glad that he shared that with us and that you helped share it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, Axel is a poet. I really deeply believe a literary genius. Like this story fell into my lap, and I'm just very grateful to be able to tell it.
I had two thoughts about what you were saying just earlier. In a section written in Axel's voice, he says, all the confusing stories is kind of like protection. It's harder for people to know who you really is, and that way they can't hurt you as easy. But at the same time, Levi, I need you to stop fact checking me every single second. You feel me? Sometimes you just got to shut the fuck up and trust me. And so I wondered about that slow peeling of the onion, right? Where the confusing stories are necessary for protection, and you are also a relationship that provides him with protection.
Yeah.
To the extent that you're able to.
Yeah. And the slow peeling of the onion, it really continues over the course of the book, where at first I really want to believe Axel and I'm all in, and then actually I think, wait, maybe he's lying to me here. I don't understand. Is he hiding something from me? And then I feel hurt, and then I try to fact check him and I try to figure out what his real story is. And what I realized in that process, in the moment, being there was what is actually the most important thing? What is if there's a truth here, what is the real truth? Is the real truth is what's most important, me fact checking Axel to see what every little detail he's told me about his life, it's 100% true, it's everything is accurate, whatever. Or is there a real larger truth here that is demonstrated particularly by the lies that Axel has to tell, that because he needs to protect himself and because he needs other kinds of protection that maybe I can provide at times or whatever, understanding that this kind of truth is a little bit more ambiguous reveals I think a much greater truth about the border in general and the violence inflicted on a huge amount of people today under militarized and externalized borders.
How do you mark the differences or similarities between our individual responsibilities to one another in relationship with the collective and political responsibility? That's what that just made me wonder.
I think it's a really good question. And it's a question that really comes to the fore of migrant caravans, right? Mm-hmm. The idea of all of these migrants, hundreds or sometimes even thousands of people fleeing their homes and deciding to all band together at once in order to hopefully make their way further through Mexico than they otherwise could individually. But in doing that, you of course attract a lot more attention, you attract a lot more vitriol. Today, you attract explicit anti-migrant state violence that by the Mexican government, but funded by the US government. And so there's a tension, right? And the way that Axel and I navigated that was, well, I'll just give an example from the book. When we were traveling on the migrant caravan, both of us started to realize that some of the migrant activists who were leading it perhaps did not have migrants' best interests at heart. And when you do that, then you have to, when you start realizing that, you start thinking like, well, do we break away? Do we just kind of do things on our own? But my deep belief, my deep political belief is that politics always starts with the other. That there's something about another person that once you enter into a relationship with them, it changes you. Because politics ultimately is not being about it's not stasis. It's about some kind of beyond, some kind of other thing that you're fighting for. And the only way to do that, I think, is to fight together. And so Axel and I at times had to figure out, which cause to fight for. Sometimes we were maybe more on our own, but sometimes we were also with other migrants. But always trying to keep in mind that the real political goal is not for some kind of unique individualist self-fulfillment, but an emancipatory politics of otherness, of working together with others, even people who you don't always trust, right? And in fact, that's the only way, I think, to do collective politics, is that you can't trust everyone. Migrants and I and everyone else are not pure. If we're looking for some kind of purity to be the basis of politics, it's going to collapse immediately. I'm not going to be it. Axel's not going to be it. No one I know is going to be the kind of change you want to see in the world. But if you work together instead and look for some kind of hope in another, I think that is a much better place to start.
There's a great brief section where you talk about each of your subjectivities and how each of you contributes, how you use your status within the caravan to gather information from certain people, and he uses his status to gather information from other people. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So again, start off, I found myself in this very bizarre situation of being on a caravan. I had been invited by the founders of the caravan, and I didn't know what it was. And so suddenly I was kind of ushered into this caravan leadership just because I had been there from the beginning and because I was a white American. I think that somehow everyone assumed that I should be part of the leadership, which is a very bizarre experience for me because I had no idea what was going on and I didn't feel like I had much to contribute one way or another. But Axel joined, I'd say about 1.5 to 2 weeks after the caravan started. And what I noticed immediately about Axel, what was so interesting was that because he had grown up in New York, he also had a completely different perspective on migration than he was like a half migrant, half not. You know, he was clearly a migrant, but he was also had this very American perspective. And until then, I hadn't had another person I could talk to be like, does this make sense to you? Like, doesn't? And so we started really talking together about like, wait, this doesn't quite make sense, or maybe this does make sense. And so what we decided to do was the leaders of the caravan would get together daily or every other day to talk about strategy, what they're going to do next, what moves they're going to make. And I was just included in those discussions, and I have no idea why, but I was invited. I think again because I was a white American guy, but Axel wasn't. And just so everyone knows, Axel is an Afro-Latino New Yorker, and he has faced certain kinds of racial discrimination in Mexico and Guatemala, as well as in the US. And because he's Afro-Latino, he sticks out more. So, people are much more suspicious of him because of his skin color. So he instead was kind of hearing on the ground with all the things that are happening with migrants, about migrants maybe breaking away on their own or doing other things, and things that I would never be privy to, because as a white guy strolling up, no one's going to tell me, right? So we decided to work together, and it became a very productive relationship, not just for the book, but just to learn and to understand. Axel quickly saw things that I would never be able to see and understood them so well, and could explain them. Again, I was kind of just dazzled from the moment I met him. Yeah.
Did you have a plan when you went down as an anthropologist for how you would deal with your otherness, with your outsider status? And I guess, did you have a plan when you were writing the book, or did it evolve organically?
Yeah. I think otherness is always a negotiation. And so at different moments, I've had to kind of negotiate my otherness differently. But you're always made aware of certain kinds of identities that you hold and that other people perceive in you. So I knew that I was often going to be pinpointed as a white American guy, because that is what I am. When I speak Spanish, I like to think that I speak it pretty well, but I still have an American accent. So you can't really blend in. If you can't blend in, you need to reflect on how you navigate those kinds of identities and the ways that other people perceive you. So there are times, and it's in the book as well, where I kind of play up my Americanness and my goofiness, because I think it kind of helps and maybe puts people at ease. There are times where when I'm in dangerous situations and I'm maybe a little worried that someone might harm me. In the book, I was in Mexico on a Fulbright grant, and so I would kind of maybe puff up my chest at times and say, like, well, I'm here on the US government wants me to be here to do research, which I would never report anything to the US government ever, but I wasn't going to tell anyone else that, right? And so there's always a negotiation, but part of that, of course, is always recognizing that in any given situation, I have a thing called a passport, a US passport that's attached to my body, like my white skin, that can give me a certain amount of privilege and power, even as it also maybe makes me a little more conspicuous in the world.
You wrote about it in a number of ways in the book too. How, when you were, so I have a question from the audience. What inspired you to put this experience into writing? And I want you to answer that question. I'm also curious, in that same answer, if you could talk about the different subjectivities that you and Axel bring to the literary project.
Yeah, sure. So what inspired me first, when I got into Mexico, I was 24 years old. I did have this research grant, but I had no institutional affiliation. I was not a trained academic. And so I was seeing all of these things happening, and I had no way to publish them academically. I also wasn't a journalist at the time. I didn't know what I was doing, but I felt like, oh my God, I'm seeing like this visceral violence, right? At the time, the US had just started externalizing its southern border. So paying Mexico millions and millions and millions of dollars every year. to militarize its immigration system, to stop as many migrants, especially women and children, from reaching the US, and women and children in particular, because they're the kinds of figures who attract media attention, right? So
Inspire
actively,
compassion. Yeah.
exactly, yes. And so actively targeting the detention and deportation of very vulnerable groups of people. And I didn't know what to do. And then when I met Axel, again, we didn't plan on writing a book. I didn't plan on writing a book even before I met him. But there was no way to report the crimes that I was seeing to the police or to any other government body, because the government and the police were the ones carrying out these crimes. And so Axel and I would just talk to each other, long conversations. What are you going to do? What am I going to do? Can I help you? And through these conversations, a dialogue evolved. And eventually we thought, well, I don't know, maybe, I was thinking maybe I should transcribe this. I don't know, maybe we could write something down. And when I started to write it down, I started thinking about Axel's voice more concretely, and Axel's subjectivity more concretely, and mine, because it felt like Axel had so much to say and said it so interestingly and so creatively. I wanted to try to figure out a way for other people to hear it. And I thought, when at first, I started writing the book, and it was really bad. Early drafts are just terrible. I hope, I'll never let anyone see the early draft. But one of the things I did, I was kept trying to quote Axel and fit him in, and from my perspective and how I saw him, and it just wasn't working. And I realized it was because of we are different. I am a young white Southerner, now academic, and Axel's an undocumented New Yorker, Afro-Latino hustler. Like we came from different worlds. And I thought, rather than trying to obscure that or not really thinking about it too much, what if I really set those kind of two things up, those two identities up? And maybe, the assumption would be that we wouldn't get along, or that that we are incompatible. And there are certain times where Axel and I have fought, as all, you fight with your friends sometimes and your family, right? But I wanted to show how there is something that we could still share something, even though we're so different. That it's actually precisely because we're so different that something interesting happens, right? Like yes, there's difference, and yes, there's distance in that difference. But if you try to traverse that together, if you have a common goal that's bigger than either of just your own selves, there's so much to share and so much to talk about.
How did you gain his trust in this more traditional format, right? It's a book. It's published in the United States. Why did he trust you?
I think he didn't at first. And there's a couple of reasons why he trusted me. One is because I'm not a traditional journalist. And at the time when I started this project, I was not a traditional academic either. And both of these professions often have some kind of professional boundaries, right? And you say, this is a subject, and they're over here, and you study them or you get quotes for them. But then that's it. You go back to your office or your other country or wherever. And I was 24. I was running around. I didn't know what was going on, but I just knew I wanted to help. And so I quickly crossed a lot of professional boundaries that I maybe shouldn't have, people, but actually I felt was so important, because I started to care about Axel. We started to become friends, and I thought, I can't just leave him on his own. And so a real material way for Axel to trust me was I decided to help him financially. I decided, because you need money to move if you're a migrant, and you don't have a lot of money if you're a migrant. And I didn't have very much money either as a person in their early 20s, but I had more than Axel. And I decided that I would spend it to help him if I could. And so I think that was a big thing. And I think it's very interesting to me that the one thing that can often help you gain trust with other people, which is to give them the material things that they need, is often the one thing in journalism or academia that people say, you can't do that because then you're not objective anymore. So that was something I didn't want to do. I said, if I'm fine, I'm not objective. I'm not objective. I'm going to help. Sorry. The second thing was that Axel hacked me. And
I was hoping you'd talk about that.
Yeah. And again, I think it's really important because, maybe this first thing about giving money, certain people would say that's a kind of intrusion on me, that someone would expect me to give them money. It feels like a financial intrusion. Well, the second thing, Axel hacking me, is another kind of intrusion, right? Axel hacked my email, all my social media. He even got into my bank account to see how much money I had. He was worried that in the beginning when we first met, he said, see it from my perspective. I just get deported. I'm in rural Mexico. And suddenly this crazy white boy with crazy long hair is asking me all these questions about my life. And I'm like, who are you? You must be CIA or DEA or something, right? So he hacked me just to try to see if he could find any correspondence with the US government. And after he hacked me and he realized I was just a crazy white boy with no connections and anything, he felt a little bit better, he said. He said, okay. And I thought about getting mad. I felt a little bit invaded, but I also felt like, well, I'm asking him about his life and I'm intruding upon him. So why wouldn't he be able to do the same for me? And that's when we started to trust each other a little more.
And that carried through to the writing process. When you were writing, did you write together or did you write separately and then somehow put the two together?
Both. What we did, Axel's passages are based on years and years of interviews. I have hundreds and hundreds and probably thousands of hours of interviews that we've done together over the last 7 years, which is how long we've been working together. And what I would do is transcribe those interviews. And then I would sit down with Axel and we would go over them many, many times together, editing them for clarity, for content. We'd rearrange different interviews together. And Axel, what my goal was, I could provide a little bit more of the literary element, but Axel could have the say in terms of what he wanted to say in this passage. Like, what is he really getting at? And there are times because of that where he tells me, as you read, to shut the fuck up, like trust him, like chill out. And I really wanted to give him that space within the book to say that. I think those are some of the most interesting times, is when Axel, instead of me being an expert or trying to tell people about what the migrant experience is, Axel can undermine me completely and say, you have it all wrong, you don't understand, and let me set the record straight. And without that kind of process together, the book would have been a much worse book. Like, I think those are the best parts of the book because they say something different than anything we've heard about a migrant experience before, because it's not told by me or someone who looks like me. It's someone who's really in the moment, living it.
I'd like to know more. I'd like to hear you talk more about the US southern border policy and how it affects both the migrant caravan section of the book and the sections after that.
Yeah. So the book is split into 4 sections. The first section is all about the migrant caravan. The second one is kind of the aftermath of the caravan in Mexico. The third one is my visa runs out, because visas affect us all, even if, this border system affects us, even if we think we have the best of it. I won't get into that too much, my high horse, but the third section is me having to go back to the US because my visas run out in Mexico, and working in DC at an immigration nonprofit, more or less as a paralegal. So the US program that I was trying to investigate at the time in the first section of the book, and that the migrant caravan was actively marching against, is called the Southern Border Program, if people haven't heard of it. Many haven't, because it's more or less a secret pact between the US and Mexico to catch and deport as many Central American migrants as possible, as quietly as possible, before they can reach the US and ask for asylum or get on TV and become sympathetic. So instead, the whole point is catch them in Mexico, deport them, keep it going, don't let them in at all costs. We'll throw so much money Mexico's way just to do that. So it's horrific to see on the ground. It felt like I was in a war zone at times. I knew people who an attempt to get around the checkpoints, an attempt to avoid the police that they knew would not only detain them and deport them back maybe to their deaths, but would beat them in the moment for fun. They would walk hundreds of miles around immigration checkpoints until they would walk the bottoms of their feet clean off. And so having to go back to the US after that, I mean, it really messed me. I wasn't prepared. You know, when I'd gone to Mexico, this was a secret program. I didn't know about it, right? You don't know about it until you're there. And then to be on the other side of the border and see the inverse, the mirror image of the Southern Border Program that is articulated through US immigration law, which explicitly now today more and more bans any kind of obvious asylum claim, right? So if you're running from gangs in Central America, because that's what many people have to flee, right? Like this gang persecution, that's not enough to win an asylum claim anymore. So even though you could die, it doesn't matter, not in the law. And poverty is another thing that a lot of people don't realize. You can't just claim asylum just because you're very poor, even though obviously if you're very poor, you don't have a home and climate change has happened and now a mudslide came and destroyed your house, which is happening more and more in Central America. Doesn't matter. It's not an asylum claim. And that is explicitly in my belief, part of the Southern Border Program. It's not linked, explicitly is the wrong word, but it is implicitly part of the Southern Border Program. And it was so frustrating to be in DC and to try to talk about this with other people. And especially, you know, when I went back, it was under the Obama administration, and no one cared.
That's when I started doing my pro bono work, and no one cared. Yeah,
and no one cared, right?
Yeah,
because we're the right people are in power, and all the right things are happening, and it's so hard to shake people out of that kind of moral complacency and righteousness. And then when Trump was elected, people seemed to care a lot more, but you know, there weren't marches in the US like there were migrant caravans in Mexico. You know, if you really care about kids in cages, what are we going to do about it? Because you posting on Instagram is not going to help. And so it was very frustrating, you know, and I had nightmares, and in the book I get into, like, I have some kind of psychosomatic symptoms. I deeply felt at the time that I wanted my body to change. I couldn't really explain what that meant, but I suddenly realized it was very linked to the fact that Axel's body was so different from mine, not just physically, not just somatically, his skin color and everything, which is very true, but also because we have this thing called a passport, that his body literally, this passport, when I hold it, it's like a magical power. My body can just do things that other people's bodies can't. And it deeply disturbed me for a while. And yeah, so I mean, that was really the impact it had on me. But then I also do want to briefly highlight the impact it has on Axel and other migrants in his position, which is not just to deport them, beat them, detain them, which happens. But when you finally are able to settle somewhere in Mexico, maybe even just temporarily, you are in constant fear that someone will rat you out, that an immigration patrol will just roll by and catch you on the street as you're outside buying tortillas or whatever. And it's the things like the constant stress and trauma of that, just being ever present with people who I know, has been horrific. They, you know, Axel, in another part of the book, he's so stressed and worried and forlorn that he starts having delusions. He really starts seeing things that at least I couldn't see. But the things that he was seeing, I try to leave ambiguous in the book because I believe that they were there, right? But he's seeing the things. This is something about this horrific system that he's seeing that's come to life in front of him that someone like me with a passport can't see in the same way.
I want to not leave that, but I want to interrupt for just a moment for an audience question, because I think it's a good time.
Great.
In your experience, what is the biggest misconception that immigration attorneys have about their clients?
Oh, that's such a good question.
Yeah.
Okay, I can only speak from my experience. But And I think I've run into some amazing immigration attorneys in my day. So I want to clarify, I don't think all immigration attorneys think this way. I think there are the sharpest immigration attorneys know exactly all the BS that's going on, and they're trying to play the game as best they can, because that's all you can do. But that being said, some of the immigration attorneys that frustrated me most were immigration attorneys who believed in the truth, that truth, capital T truth, was the same truth that the US immigration courts believed in. That also believing that maybe my client might be lying, or, like we just, if you believe that, if you don't see how the truth is constructed in such a certain way in the US immigration system to deny the vast majority of people asylum, right? Because that is the thing that we don't say about asylum. We say, oh, we should give everyone asylum. We should welcome them to the country. The asylum system was invented to make sure the vast majority cannot enter the US, right? Yeah. We create a myth of a good migrant, a perfect migrant that very, very few people can live up to. But we say that's the only person we let in. But in doing that, all of the other people who are imperfect, like me or you or anyone else, get denied and get deported, or at the very least have to live the rest of their lives in fear as undocumented people, working incredibly exploitative jobs without any kind of opportunity to study in the same way that I can, or get social services in the same way that I can. And the thing that frustrated me the most was when immigration attorneys would talk about how they thought their clients were lying or they weren't good people. I thought, forget you. Why are you doing this then? Go do anything else, because that's not what we're here to do.
That it's a reasonable segue to talk about the death by 1,000 paper cuts that we chatted about earlier. Yeah. And how the violence of the immigration legal system is the gathering of paperwork, the forcing people to tell their most horrific stories over and over again, the constant disbelief, the constant challenges to their narratives. And there's a point in the book where physical violence is perpetrated against the people in the caravan by the police state. And the way that you write it, it almost feels as if it ends abruptly, like they get exhausted, or someone hits a bell somewhere and they decide to just stop. And so the harms that are done are just carried forward, right? They're just supposed to be processed as if it was normal. And I wonder if you could talk about the relationship between the physical violence and the legal violence.
Yeah, I would love to. It's something I'm also trying to study more in depth anthropologically, and hopefully, I'm writing my dissertation now. I hope eventually it'll become a book. So maybe I can explore some of those things in a more academic sense later on. But what I can say is police and immigration in Mexico do not act the same as police and immigration in the US. It doesn't mean that they're any less violent. It's just a different kind of violence that's in a different kind of society, right? And so what I found fascinating, this has happened not just since this was the first time it ever happened with the Migrant Caravan in 2015 when we write about it in the book, but it's happened several times since, in which a caravan comes. They say they want to go to, say, Mexico City. They're trying to get there. And the police say, you can't get there. Like, we're not letting you get there. And they say, we're coming through one way or another. So do what you have to do. So they confront a police line, right? The police have 100, 200, 300 militarized police. This is an army that has come to hurt people. But in the US, where if you kind of ran up with 1,000 people and started pushing against the police, you would probably expect that people would die, right? Like the police are probably, we all kind of know that. But in Mexico, there's a kind of different negotiation where there's not that kind of immediate belief the police will kill you, but they will beat you. And so what happens is there's kind of this very bizarre social negotiation in which people submit themselves to be beaten for a certain amount of time. And then the police, and I've never been able to figure this out. Maybe someone from Mexico can help me with this, but as an American, I've never quite understood it. Eventually say, okay, that's enough. Like, we've beaten you enough. You've endured this violence enough. Now you can pass through. And I think it's a really interesting micro moment that shows the broader system at play, that there's something about what we expect, whether it's this physical violence of pushing through Mexico and you just have to submit yourself to this violence, otherwise you're not going to get through, or the same kind of process that happens at the legal level with asylum, in which you must submit yourself to kind of psychic violence, right? In the hopes that by bearing your soul, by saying, I've left this country behind and it's terrible country and everyone there is terrible and only the US can save me, and this horrible kind of thing that you have to speak, because it's not true, right? That somehow through that suffering, you will be granted a visa or a green card or whatever. So yeah, there's absolutely, you're very right to note a parallel between the two there.
We are getting close to the end of our time, and this might be a big or a small question. I don't know. I want to know. I want to know about love and the role it plays in social justice work and in the book. I like Axel's voice on this. He says, when he's talking about hacking, he says, I think hacking is a gift. Some people are just born with it. Some people are just born with it, I believe. It's like you can see things that for anybody else wouldn't have made sense. It's a language, a living thing, a world. It's a passion. It's love. To come back again and again and again and again, just to see if you can go a little further than before. And I thought that was just a stunning description of approaching the border, of you and Axel approaching one another. And I just wondered if you could speak to that.
Absolutely. Thank you for reading that passage, actually, because it was a really important one to both of us. When I spent a lot of time trying to ask Axel about how he understood hacking, like what was it for him? And there are two answers. The first one, which I think is also profound, where he says that hacking allows him to do things that he could never otherwise do with his body. That there's something about he can traverse a digital space where he can't traverse a physical space. And the second thing, though, which is even more intangible, which I love, is this exact passage where he says, hacking is like love. It's like desire. It's something that compels me, that I can't help but go back and try to learn more and go a little further. And that is exactly what he's doing with computer systems. But of course, it's also what he's doing, trying to get back to the US. And in some ways, that's what I'm trying to do in our relationship. And maybe at times he's trying to do as well, that we return to each other when we have no other option, when there doesn't seem to be any kind of other answer. I can at least go to Axel and talk to him. And maybe we don't have a perfect solution. Maybe we don't have a cure, but it's something. And I think that is a kind of love, and it's very complicated love. And it's not the kind of love that I think is, when we say love in a contemporary mainstream sense, that's not the love I mean, because this love is difficult. But it is real, I think. And I wanted to put that in the book. I wanted to show a different kind of love. And a love is a willingness to risk oneself for another, right? Like that's what it is. This kind of love is not just about, well, you need to love me because I love myself. And, it's about, I am compelled and I don't know why, but I have to come back and I'm going to risk who I am for you, for us. And that's what I hoped, and what Axel hoped to really communicate in the book, because that's the only kind of love, I think, that in this most urgent of times, in a world that feels like it's falling apart, we have to risk something of ourselves for others. Especially, my belief is, people who look like me need to risk more, and they need to risk themselves physically and financially for people who don't have the same kind of safety.
who, I'm going to ask you directly. I know we've talked about this, but who is this book for? Who are you trying to reach?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you asked me, there's a passage in the book where I get very frustrated in DC. I'm talking with these very good-minded people, right? These good liberals. And I say something like, it's always the people who already believe that they're leading moral lives who are the hardest to reach. And it's my critique of kind of good liberals and good progressives in the US. And it's my frustration because I don't know exactly what to say. You know, I think that this moral complacency that exists within a certain kind of liberalism and progressivism is exactly, I mean, it is, in my opinion, killing so much political momentum in the United States that I already have it figured out and I'm good. And if these stupid savages in the red states could just like get themselves educated, then everything would be better. And I think that is exactly the kind of thing that halts any kind of political, if you want to call it progress or change or direction in this country. And so I'm writing the book with those people in mind. I really hope that it can convince some of them to get off the couch and do something else. But I'm also trying to write at the same time for the people who maybe don't feel exactly that way. All the other people who feel very alienated by our politics in the US generally, that liberalism isn't speaking to what they care about, and maybe are they repulsed by certain strains of conservatism or republicanism in this country, but they don't really have a better outlet for their politics. I'm trying, and I think Axel is trying to say, perhaps there is another way, but it comes with more risk. But if our world is falling apart, if we really believe in climate change, if we really believe in militarized borders are hurting millions of people, we're going to have to do something about it that's different. But I actually think it can be scary, but I actually think a lot of people, it resonates with them because they're told all you have to do is vote every 4 years. All you have to do is believe the right things. Well, if that was true, why are we in this situation? We have to do something else.
I guess that leads to maybe what is a good last question. And that's it's an audience question, which is, where do you want to take the border hacker story? What's next for you and what's next for Axel?
That's a great question. What can I say about that? You know, some other people have asked me, is Axel going to make an appearance? Are you going to write another book? What's going on? I have no plan at the moment to write a border hacker 2, like a clear, obvious second act, so to speak. That being said, I don't think that this is the last of Axel's story. And that's all I can really say right now. But a funny thing about writing a book is you're always planning, and your goal, the book is on the horizon, you got to get there and you got to get there. And then suddenly the book is done and life keeps happening. It doesn't end, you know? And Axel and I are still very much in touch. We text and talk on the phone just about every single day. He's truly one of my best friends. And in the book, I struggle really hard to figure out a right word because it feels like saying friend is too shallow. Saying family doesn't always exactly feel right for different reasons that I get into in the book. But whatever Axel is, to me, I land on the word tocayo, and there's a whole thing, but Axel's not going away from my life. I'm not leaving him, or I hope he doesn't break up with me, but there's more to Axel's story, and we will try to figure out how to tell it eventually.
Great. Thank you so much for your time here.
Thank you. I mean, this has been a really wonderful conversation, and you've been a very generous and kind reader and attentive reader. So thank you.
You're welcome. It was a delight. I'm grateful that we got to meet and that we get to have this conversation and share it with others.
Same.
Yes, Courtney, thank you for leading this conversation. I'm so glad you two could talk about this. And Levi, thank you for sharing yourself and your story and these experiences with us. It was a real joy to see this come to life. And I'm so honored that we're one of your first events for this book.
Thank you. I'm honored. It's been so wonderful.
Yes, and to my viewers at home, please don't forget to purchase a copy, and that link can be found in the YouTube chat through our friends at Third Place Books. Thank you all, and have a great night.